Good afternoon and welcome to Dahlgren Chapel of the Sacred Heart. This we call our spiritual heart of the Georgetown community. My name is Father Mark Bosco, the Vice President for Mission and Ministry, and on behalf of the university and President John DeGioia, I wish to thank you for joining us today for this Dahlgren Chapel Sacred Lecture Series. Today we're honored to have Father John O'Malley of the Society of Jesus speak to us about Ignatius and his companions, their quiet revolutions. Father O'Malley is no stranger to our community. He's loved and adored. He's served as university professor in the theology department since his arrival in 2005 and has led a series of lectures over the years here in Dahlgren Chapel. This series was inaugurated in the fall of 2014 after the completion of the renovations of this beautiful chapel. As a way to celebrate the chapel as a space for our ongoing engagement with matters of faith and spiritual companionship, the Sacred Lectures continues a tradition that was a practice of the early Jesuits. St. Ignatius and his companions offered lectures outside the context of liturgy with the intent to inform and to edify those seeking to grow in faith and hope and love. These lectures sometimes dealt with Scripture, but also engaged with the moral life, the life of prayer, the person of Jesus, and the challenges we face in everyday life. These lectures were meant to be accessible to a wider audience and were a staple of Jesuit pastoral practice in our schools and in our churches. In that spirit and style, we have adapted that tradition to meet the needs of our current moment here at Georgetown, seeking out distinguished speakers engaged with a range of topics related to spirituality, social justice, and the Jesuit intellectual and artistic tradition. Our guests have included the Catholic novelist Alice McDermott, Father David Hollenbach from our own Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, the famed Czech philosopher Father Thomas Halík, Sister Simone Campbell of the Network for Catholic Social Justice, our beloved friend, recently deceased, Father Howard Gray, and Sister Donna Markham, the president of Catholic Charities here in the U.S. This afternoon, we're grateful to have this opportunity to welcome once again John O'Malley. He's a renowned author, professor, and historian of early modern Europe, with special focus on the Catholic Church during the Italian Renaissance. He's received Lifetime Achievement Awards from the Society for Italian Historical Studies, the Renaissance Society of America, and the American Catholic Historical Association. In 2016, Father O'Malley received the Centennial Medal from the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences of Harvard University, that school's highest honor. This past summer, Harvard University Press published his latest book, When Bishops Meet, an essay comparing Trent, Vatican I, and Vatican II. I think he's using that as his major text for his seminar this spring. Father O'Malley is loved, and especially for being instrumental in nourishing what we might call the field of Jesuit studies and academia, working as a colleague, an editor, and an inspiration for other academics who now write and research on the cultural and spiritual history of the society. Father O'Malley is a wonderful presence here on campus, teaching, giving talks, celebrating the Eucharist for our Georgetown community these many years. So John, I'd like to thank you for honoring us with your presence and sharing these reflections tonight. And let us now please welcome John to the podium.
Thank you, Mark. I'm really pleased to know that I'm both loved and adored. Sometimes I don't know what I'm doing. I'm on automatic pilot. More often, I know what I am doing, but I do not see its long-term implications. When over 70 years ago, I wrote a letter inquiring about how I might join the Society of Jesus, Never having laid eyes on a Jesuit in my entire life up to that point, I certainly did not see what the repercussions of that letter would be. No, if I'd only known. We rarely see the full implications of decisions we make. By making a decision, we know we are venturing down a new path, but we do not see where that path might ultimately be leading. That reality, as it pertains to the first Jesuits, is what I will speak about this afternoon. I propose that St. Ignatius and his companions ventured into new paths, which they knew were new, but did not know what a powerful punch they packed. They did not see what significant breakthroughs they were making. They did not see how profoundly they would affect the culture and traditions of the Catholic Church. They were thus quiet and unwitting revolutionaries. Not only unwitting, unwilling. They had no desire to shake things up. They would therefore be shocked and not particularly pleased to be described as revolutionaries. But I shall argue that that is what they were. We at Georgetown are the heirs of their quiet revolutions, and those revolutions impact upon us every day. I will describe 5 such revolutions or breakthroughs. There may be others, but these will have to suffice for this afternoon. They are, in the following order: the spiritual exercises, the constitutions of the Society of Jesus, a new asceticism, the schools, and networking. Pride of place must, of course, go to the exercises. Despite their foundational importance, I can be brief in speaking about them because you've already heard a great deal about them and perhaps have even made them. Nonetheless, if we are speaking of breakthroughs, we cannot omit a work unlike any other in the history of Christian literature up to that time. We cannot omit a work that created a new ministry in the Catholic Church, the spiritual retreat. We cannot omit a work that had such profound implications for the development of Christian spirituality. Until the exercises, the corpus of Christian spiritual literature consisted in sermons and homilies, in the lives and legends of the saints, in autobiographical reports of divine visions, in collections of spiritual aphorisms, as in The Imitation of Christ, and by the early 16th century, in treatises on the spiritual life, such as Erasmus's Handbook of the Christian Soldier. But there was no book that provided a practical program to help persons get in deeper touch with themselves and with God. The exercises said, if you want to live a more meaningful and love-filled life, here's a program that might help you. It is flexible and non-prescriptive, yet coherent in its movement and clear in its ultimate objective. On one level, spiritual retreats are older than Christianity itself, but they were isolated and individualized experiences, never developed into a fully thought-out program capable of taking off to become a standard exercise for devout Christians. That is what happened with the exercises. Ignatius and his companions began giving the exercises, and at a certain point, they established retreat houses to formalize the breakthrough and give it an institutional home. The retreat, whether in the Ignatian form or in the many other forms that have sprung up since the exercises led the way, became not only a standard ministry in the Catholic Church, but a ministry characteristically Catholic, and until relatively recently, almost exclusively Catholic. The elements that Ignatius wove together to make the exercises were traditional and to a large extent standard elements of late medieval piety. He coordinated those elements to make something new. In so doing, he gave new life and significance to some of those elements. I will mention only two. The first is discernment of spirits. Ignatius did not invent discernment, but by incorporating it into the exercises, he showed that it was an integral part of a truly devout Christian life. Moreover, in the analysis of discernment that he presented, he moved it to a new level of sophistication. The second element is the critical role Ignatius assigns to the director in the exercises, the partner who provides guidance, encouragement, and when necessary, caution. In highlighting the role of the director, he gave impetus to spiritual direction as a component part of the devout life. In the late 16th and 17th centuries, spiritual direction entered into a new golden age, largely due to the impact of the exercises. Just this morning, I received notice of a new book in French that argues precisely that point. Today, largely as a result of the new vitality the exercises now enjoy, spiritual direction seems to have entered into another golden age. The Constitutions. Ignatius, as Superior General of the Society of Jesus, wrote the document in collaboration with his brilliant secretary, Juan Alfonso de Polanco. It is an intellectually more mature document than the spiritual exercises for two reasons. First, Ignatius himself had the training of his degree at the University of Paris, something he did not have when he wrote most of the exercises. He also had the experience of his 9 companions of the University of Paris and the experience of their give and take over the course of the 7 or 8 years together before they founded the society. He had their give and take in the culminating event of those years when they, in 1539, in the evenings of 2 straight months, sat together and hammered out a sketch of the religious order they wanted to found. By 1548, when Ignatius and Polanco set seriously to work on the constitutions, he had had 7 years of experience governing an order that was growing at fast speed and operating in almost every Western European country, as well as in Portuguese America and Asia. The second reason for the document's sophistication is Polanco's contribution. He came from a prominent and wealthy family in Burgos, was educated at some of the best institutions of the day, including Paris, where his uncle had been the rector, that is, the president. He also had a fine humanistic education, which taught him that documents needed to have beginning, middle, and end, not be just a bunch of thoughts thrown somehow together. Polanco's major contribution was, as I suggested, making sure the document had coherence and movement forward from beginning to end. Ignatius, we might say, provided the basic insights, while Polanco articulated them and put them brilliantly together. The result, if the exercises are a classic because they created a new literary form, the constitutions are a classic because they took the established form of constitutions and raised it to an entirely new level. The constitutions that Teresa of Avila, a younger contemporary of Ignatius, wrote for her Reform of Carmel open thus, quotation, "Matins are to be said after 9 o'clock, not before, but not too long afterwards," close quotation. Teresa's constitutions continue along that line with precise regulations for the details of community life. They, in that regard, are typical of the pattern found in the correlative documents of other orders of both men and women. The opening line of the Jesuit constitutions already indicates how radically they will differ from such documents. And they thus, from the very first word, indicate what a breakthrough they were going to be. Quotation. As it was our Creator and Lord, in his sovereign wisdom and goodness, who deigned to begin this least society of Jesus, so it is he who will preserve, govern, and foster its growth in his holy service. On our part, it is the inner law of charity and love that the Holy Spirit traces and engraves on our hearts that will contribute to this end more than any written constitutions. Nonetheless, because the sweet disposition of divine providence requires our cooperation, and because the Vicar of Christ has so ordained, and the example of the saints and reason itself so teach us in the Lord, we judge it necessary to draw up constitutions. Close quotation. Those opening words show not only that with the Jesuit constitutions, we move into a higher level of intellectual sophistication. They also suggest we are moving into a level where profound spirituality partners with that intellectual sophistication to create something new, a real breakthrough. Do not misunderstand me. The constitutions are crowded, even cluttered, with stipulations and directives. But those stipulations and directives are encased in an articulated spiritual framework. The framework imbues the stipulations with a coherence that promoted a way of proceeding, a coherence that resulted in a style, in a mode of being and acting. Although that resulting mode of being and acting was complex, Jerome Nadal, Ignatius's peripatetic agent in the field, was able to capture the essence of it with his triad, spiritu, corde, practice. Spiritu, with the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. Corde, from the heart, sincerely and genuinely. Practice, practically or pastorally, that is, committed to action for the good of others. The Jesuits thus learned that how they did what they did, our mode of proceeding, was just as important as what they did. The stipulations in the constitutions are remarkable also for another reason. They are consistently qualified with escape clauses. Such and such is to be done unless under the circumstances something else seems called for. In that way, the constitutions subtly encourage initiative and a certain independence of judgment on the part of Jesuits. Or, as one author put it, they created an institution wherein the members feel empowered even as they live under obedience to their superiors. The developmental principle that provides the structure for the constitutions also contributes to the sense of empowerment and initiative of the members. That the developmental principle that provides the structure for the constitutions also contributes to the sense of empowerment and initiative of the members. The 10 parts into which the constitutions are divided follow the Jesuit from his entrance into the society through his commissioning as a mature Jesuit ready for ministry. They recognize, therefore, that what is helpful for a novice is not necessarily helpful for a more experienced Jesuit. One size does not fit all. This was strikingly new in the constitutions of religious orders. Adding to the coherence of the Jesuit constitutions was an implicit theological underpinning. This was another breakthrough for such documents. It was the element that gave firmness to the Constitution's spiritual framework. By the time Ignatius wrote the Constitutions, he, and especially Polanco, had become disciples of St. Thomas Aquinas. And that discipleship is discernible in the Constitutions. The implication of the axiom that grace is not in conflict with our human nature, but perfects it, runs through the Constitutions. St. Thomas was a theologian who pressed the implications of that axiom about as far as they could go. The result was that the Constitutions breathe a humanity uncommon in a juridical document such as a constitution. That humanity is almost palpable in our next subject, a new asceticism. It is fair to say, I think, that Christianity had no clearly articulated ascetical tradition until the 4th century, when the writings by and about the so-called fathers and mothers of the desert began to appear. Those writings set in motion a powerful tradition that almost defined the pathway to sanctity from that time forward. The tradition is rich and complex, but two principles predominate in it: contempt of the world and contempt of the flesh. To put it bluntly, the latter principle held that the more harshly one treated one's body, the better one's chances of intimacy with God. That principle ran through virtually every story in the Golden Legend, that extremely popular collection of saints' lives composed in the 13th century. The Golden Legend was one of the 2 books Ignatius read while he was recovering from his battle wounds at the Castle of Loyola, and that led to his conversion there. When he later retired to Manresa, he put that principle into practice with his usual single-mindedness. Instead of leading Ignatius to God, it brought him to such a point of misery and despair that he contemplated suicide. By the grace of God, and with the help of his confessor, Ignatius was able to change course. He learned his lesson. In the exercises themselves, he wrote the rules regarding eating, in which he urged moderation. Up to that time, most orders required its members to fast daily from the feast of the Exaltation of the Cross in September until Easter. No such stipulation appears in the constitutions, nor are any other permanent penances imposed. Each member was to decide, after consultation with his confessor, what was helpful for himself. The constitutions made a statement that sounds bland and commonplace to us today, but that for its times was groundbreaking. Quotation: "While excessive concern for one's health is to be reprehended, a moderate care to preserve one's health is praiseworthy and should be had by all." Close quotation. With that, the Constitution implicitly articulated a new mode of asceticism and a considerable modification of the Christian tradition in that regard. Ignatius went further. He insisted that large Jesuit communities have a villa in the countryside to which the members could retire from time to time for rest and for a break in their routine. He insisted that Jesuit houses be well built, have good ventilation, and be located in healthy areas of the city. He mandated that the Jesuits at the Roman College have a physician on contract to provide for any faculty or student who fell ill. This new ascetical tradition finally, and to a large extent, won the day. Most, but certainly not all, areas of Catholic life today so unquestionably take it for granted that we have lost all sense of its great novelty for its day. It did not, however, catch on easily or swiftly. Upon no more groundbreaking path did the Lord lead Ignatius than in Ignatius' decision to make formal schooling the primary ministry of the society. As you know well, entering that path was far from the 10 founders' minds when they sat together in 1539, discerning the kind of order they wanted to found. They decided, in essence, that the society would pursue the traditional Catholic ministries, but do so in a missionary mode. Put more straightforwardly, they founded the Society of Jesus as an order of missionaries. But by the time Ignatius died in 1556, the Jesuits were operating some 30 schools, principally in Italy, but also in Spain, France, and Germany. By the time Pope Clement XIV suppressed the society in 1773, they were operating over 700 worldwide, the largest network of schools under one aegis in the history of the world, even though currently the number of educational institutions in some way or other associated with the Society of Jesus may come close to rivaling that number. Although Ignatius' decision was therefore momentous for the Society of Jesus, it was also momentous for the Catholic Church at large, principally for two reasons. The first, as is often said, the Jesuits were the first teaching order in the Catholic Church. What did that mean? And what did it not mean? It did not mean that no priests or members of religious orders taught school before the Jesuits, or even that no religious order ran schools before the Jesuits. The Dominicans, the Franciscans, and the Augustinians, for instance, ran schools, usually called studia, to prepare their members for a life of ministry. What does it mean, therefore, to say that the Jesuits are the first teaching order in the Catholic Church? It means especially three things. First, the Jesuits were the first to make schooling not only an occasional ministry of the order, but to formalize it as an integral component of what they were about. Second, it means that the Jesuits assumed full responsibility for the successful operation of the school, which meant securing the building, securing the finances, teaching the classes, and administering the whole enterprise. The schools required Ignatius to become a fundraiser, a conventionally worldly task and a significant breakthrough in models of what a saint does and looks like. The third is the most fundamental. The Jesuit schools were for the training not of future priests, but for the training of young laymen, very few of whom would go on to a clerical career. That was truly new and momentous in its implications. Despite many difficulties, some of them embarrassing in the extreme, the Jesuit schools were successful. Success begets imitation. By the 17th century, other teaching orders of both men and women sprang up, now that the Jesuits had made the breakthrough. By that century, therefore, the management and staffing of schools had become a standard ministry in the Catholic Church, a quiet but stunning revolution in modes of Catholic ministry. Ignatius' decision was, moreover, momentous for the Society of Jesus and for the Church at large for a second reason. It transformed the culture of the Society of Jesus, and in so doing, created a new model of what it meant to be a learned priest. There were plenty of learned priests before the Jesuits. St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Bonaventure spring immediately to mind. That model was most certainly what Ignatius and his companions had in mind in 1539 when they envisaged their new order. In their founding document, they provided a serious educational regimen for new recruits to the order. But with the founding of the schools, that regimen underwent a radical transformation. In the schools for laypersons destined for careers in the secular world, the Jesuits had to teach worldly subjects. They had to teach poetry, drama, mathematics, astronomy, physics, and other subjects along that line. Jesuits had to become learned in those subjects as well as in the clerical subjects of philosophy and theology. They became learned priests in a new worldly way, and thus they provided a new model for priesthood in the Catholic Church. It was a model that won them admiration, but also bewilderment, criticism, and even threats. It was new. Today we celebrate how in the 17th century, Matteo Ricci used his literary and mathematical skills to win the emperor's permission for Catholic missionaries to enter China and proselytize. We celebrate the place in the canon of English language literary greats won by Gerard Manley Hopkins. We marvel at the cartographic skills of so many Jesuit missionaries who first explored the wilderness of Spanish and Portuguese overseas domains. None of this would have happened had it not been for the worldly culture that Ignatius' decision to operate schools brought with it. The world is our house, Jerome Nadal told the Jesuits time and time again. He meant that the Jesuits were to be on the move pastorally throughout the whole world. No place was off bounds. By the time Ignatius died, however, Nadal's words could bear a broader meaning. The world is our house in that we are engaged in worldly studies and engaged in preparing students for careers in the world. We do this because we are convinced that such engagements are essential for a healthy church and a healthy human community. In this way, the Jesuits radically redefined the contempt of the world principle of the traditional ascetical tradition. Here, too, they were quiet revolutionaries. Networking. The unabridged Oxford English Dictionary, the famous OED, recognizes network only as a noun. Yet today, we are perhaps most familiar with it as a verb. We like to network with people. Institutions such as universities strive to network with similar institutions. Georgetown University, for instance, networks with a number of other institutions of higher learning throughout the whole world. The word may be of recent vintage, but the reality is not. In that regard, once again, the Jesuits broke new ground for religious order and to some extent, even for other international institutions, such as the Spanish and Portuguese empires. Ignatius laid the groundwork for this development in two ways. The first was his concern that Jesuits be able effectively to communicate their ideas. Traditional religious orders emphasize silence in their normative documents. Except for the novices, the constitutions have nothing to say about silence, lots to say about conversation, that is, communication. His second concern was that the Jesuits in the field keep in close communication with the central office. He insisted on the observance of clear directives in that regard. The result was a remarkable flow of information back and forth from center and periphery, a flow superior, I venture to say, to that of any other institution of the day. The flow was not, however, restricted to one-on-one relationship between Rome and a particular individual or community elsewhere. Polanco saw to it that the information was shared broadly, so that Jesuits in one place knew what Jesuits in other places were doing. Polanco summarized the letters as they poured into the Curia, and then he put the results in circular letters to be read from the pulpit in every Jesuit community community dining room throughout the world. The Jesuits thus learned from both the successes and the failures of their brother Jesuits elsewhere. This massive flow of correspondence was not limited, however, to flow between center and periphery. It included a massive horizontal flow as Jesuits communicated with one another about what they were doing and how they were doing it. The most impressive aspect of this phenomenon is the correspondence between Jesuit missionaries and Jesuit schools in Europe. The missionaries sent the schools their maps of the exotic places they were exploring, which allowed the schools to have information about the geography of those places that no other educational institutions had. The missions also sent them sketches of the flora and fauna of those distant regions, and even specimens of plants and trees unknown in Europe, which meant that the gardens in the Jesuit schools became exceedingly important teaching tools. They sent medicinal herbs used by the Amerindians, among which quinine was the most important. In response, Jesuits in Europe opened pharmacies in many cities in which they worked. The letters and porcelain and jade art objects the Jesuits sent back to Europe from China stand out for their immense cultural impact. The Jesuits in Europe carefully edited and published the letters and distributed the art objects, which created a sensation. It is no exaggeration to say that what Europeans of the 17th and 18th century knew about China, they learned from the Jesuits. In return, the missionaries received good publicity for their endeavors, won benefactors to support them, and sowed the seeds for missionary vocations. They, moreover, provided historians today with massive documentation for exploring a relatively new field, what we call Atlantic history. Much, much more could be said about every subject I have touched upon, but perhaps I have said enough to show how Ignatius and his companions were quiet and unwitting, but important revolutionaries. I hope I have raised your admiration for them, and in so doing, raised your appreciation for the heritage that we all share in whatever way we are associated with Georgetown University. Thank you.